Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a world without a glowing screen in every palm. Imagine a world where your entire social network was limited to the kids who lived on your block, and your only window into the wider universe was a heavy wooden box in the living room that took 2 minutes to warm up. Imagine a world where the air smelled like a mixture of gasoline, freshly cut grass, and backyard barbecue smoke, and where your parents had absolutely no way of reaching you once you stepped out the front door. This was not a primitive wilderness. This was childhood in the 1960s. It was a decade that began in the black and white tranquility of the post-war era and ended in a psychedelic explosion of color, sound, and social revolution. To grow up in the 1960s was to witness the world changing in real time, shifting from the traditional values of the greatest generation to the experimental spirit of the youth movement. If you lived through it, welcome back to the sights and sounds of your youth. If you did not, prepare to discover a time that was as wild as it was wonderful. In the early 1960s, childhood was defined by a level of independence that seems almost impossible today. We call it the free-range childhood. Back then, the neighborhood was an extension of your own backyard. From the moment school let out until the sun dipped below the horizon, children were the undisputed masters of the outdoors. There were no scheduled play dates arranged by parents via text message. You simply grabbed your bike, the one with the high-rise banana seat and sleek chrome fenders, and you rode until you found a pile of bikes lying on a front lawn. That was the universal sign that your friends were there. We played games that required nothing but imagination and stamina. Kick the can, hide and seek, and tag lasted for hours. We built forts in the woods using scavenged plywood and rusty nails, and we spent entire afternoons exploring local creeks, coming home with muddy boots and pockets full of smooth stones or tadpoles. There were no helmets, no knee pads, and very few rules other than one cardinal law: be home when the streetlights come on. The technology of the era was tactile and mechanical. If you wanted to talk to a friend, you headed for the rotary phone sitting on a small table in the hallway. You had to physically hook your finger into the plastic dial and rotate it for every single digit. If you messed up the last number, you had to hang up and start the entire process over again. There was no such thing as a private conversation. The cord was short, and your mother was usually within earshot in the kitchen. Worse yet, you often had to speak to your friend's father first, a daunting task for any 10-year-old. And if your friend was already on the phone, you simply got a rhythmic, buzzing, busy signal. There was no call waiting and no voicemail. You simply tried again in an hour. Life moved at a slower, more deliberate pace. Every morning, you might hear the clink of glass bottles as the milkman delivered fresh dairy to your doorstep, and the most prized possession for any young person was the transistor radio. It was a small plastic brick that could fit in your pocket, allowing you to carry the top 40 hits with you wherever you went. Pressed against your ear at night under the covers, that tiny speaker was your secret gateway to the world of rock and roll. As the decade progressed, pop culture became the glue that held the youth generation together. Saturday morning was a sacred ritual for every child in America. Long before the era of streaming or 24-hour cartoon channels, you had one shot to catch your favorite shows. You would wake up early, pour a bowl of sugary cereal, and plant yourself in front of the television to watch the Flintstones, the Jetsons, or the mystery-solving adventures of Scooby-Doo. Because you could not pause or rewatch these moments, they felt more significant. You discussed the episodes on the playground on Monday morning with the intensity of scholars. The toys of the 1960s were equally legendary, though by modern standards, many of them were hilariously dangerous. We had the original slip and slide, which was essentially a long sheet of thin plastic laid over hard ground. If there was a rock underneath it, you found out the hard way. We had sea monkeys, those mysterious creatures advertised in the back of comic books that turned out to be tiny brine shrimp. We played with chatty Cathy dolls that spoke when you pulled a string and bounced super balls that could leap over a house if you hit the pavement just right. And who could forget the candy counter? For a few pennies, you could get wax bottles filled with neon syrup, Necco wafers, or those chalky candy cigarettes that let us pretend we were just like the cool adults we saw on television. Everything changed on the night of February 9th, 1964. 73 million people tuned in to watch the Edie Sullivan Show, but for the kids and teenagers in the audience, it was a lightning bolt to the soul. Four young men from Liverpool with shaggy hair and matching suits stepped onto the stage, and the British invasion began. The Beatles did more than just play music, they shifted the entire cultural landscape overnight. Suddenly, the clean-cut look of the 1950s felt ancient. Boys started growing their hair long, sparking fierce battles with fathers who had served in the military and believed ears should always be visible. Girls traded in their stiff dresses for miniskirts and go-go boots. By the middle of the decade, the innocent vibe of the early 60s was being replaced by something more vibrant and rebellious. Tie-dye shirts, bell-bottom jeans, and peace signs became the uniform of a generation that was starting to question the status quo. The dinner table became a battlefield of the generation gap, as the music grew louder and the lyrics grew more provocative. Yet growing up in the 1960s was not just about music and toys. It was about living in the shadow of monumental history. We were the first generation to grow up with the television as a primary source of news, and that meant the world's triumphs and tragedies were brought directly into our living rooms. The space race was the ultimate adventure of our lives. We watched in breathless wonder as the Mercury and Gemini missions paved the way for the ultimate goal. In July 1969, families huddled together around grainy black and white sets to watch Neil Armstrong take those first steps on the lunar surface. For a few hours, the entire planet felt united in awe. But that wonder was often balanced by a deep, underlying tension. This was the peak of the Cold War, and children were not shielded from the threat of nuclear conflict. We participated in duck and cover drills at school, kneeling under our wooden desks and covering our necks, as if a thin layer of oak could protect us from an atomic blast. We saw the fallout shelter signs in the basements of public buildings, a silent reminder that the world was a fragile place. As we grew older and reached our teenage years toward the end of the decade, the evening news became even more somber. The Vietnam War was the first televised conflict, and every night, the dinner hour was interrupted by footage of helicopters and jungle warfare. We watched the civil rights movement unfold, seeing the bravery of people marching for equality in the face of immense opposition. We felt the shockwaves of the disappearances of leaders like John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., and Robert Kennedy. These events shaped our worldview, making us more socially conscious and politically active than the generations that came before us. We realized that the world was not just the idyllic neighborhood we played in, but a complex, often violent place that needed change. Looking back, the 1960s was a decade of intense contrasts. It was a time of immense freedom where children could roam for miles without a care in the world. Yet it was also a time of great responsibility as we watched the world transform before our eyes. It was the era of the first Mustang and the first man on the moon, of garage bands and protest songs. We learned to be independent, to use our imaginations, and to find community in the simple act of playing outside until the stars came out. While every generation feels their childhood was special, there is something uniquely magical about the 60s. It was the last moment of a certain kind of innocence before the digital age, a time when life was measured in slow summer afternoons and the crackle of a vinyl record. Whether you remember the smell of your first easy bake oven cake or the thrill of seeing the Beatles for the first time, those memories remain a part of who we are. We want to hear from you now. If you were a child of the 60s, what was the one toy you couldn't live without? Was it a G.I. Joe with a fuzzy beard or a light-up hula hoop? And when you think of your childhood bedroom, what song comes to mind and takes you right back to that time and place? Let us know in the comments below. Your stories are the history of this incredible era, and sharing them keeps that spirit alive. If you enjoyed this trip through time, please hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the decades that shaped us. Until next time, keep those memories bright and the music playing loud.